I've got this little saying, but it's like formal strategy is written, actual strategy is spoken. So emergent
Oh, no.
strategy for me is a constantly spoken phenomenon. Don't optimize your strategy on paper, optimize it through action. Frustrates many people, is the strangulating effect of modern governance on many organizations.
Yeah, yeah.
The idea that you have to get both engaged, the emotional and the intellectual side of the organization, is not new. It's just
No.
kind of alien to some organizations at the moment.
Welcome to Strategy Meets Reality podcast. I'm your host, Mike Jones, and today I'm joined by Professor Donald MacLean, physicist turned strategy researcher, complexity thinker, and strategy consultant. We unpack what strategy really is, why governance is strangling adaptability, and how conversation, not control, keeps strategy alive. This is about putting people, not PowerPoint, at the heart of strategy. Welcome back to the Strategy Meets Reality podcast. I'm your host, Mike Jones, and today I'm glad to be joined by Donald MacLean. It's great to have you on the show. We've conversed a few times on LinkedIn, and it's been a pleasure to finally get you on the show. Yeah, well, welcome.
Thank you very much, Mike. It's a great honour and a pleasure to be here.
Ah, cool. So just for our listeners, do you mind giving a bit of a background about yourself and a bit of context of what you've been up to lately?
Sure. So background, I actually started out life as a physicist, and I think that's what kind of drew me into the field of uncertainty, which was one of the things that really interested me when I was studying physics. I then did a PhD in laser physics, and that's when I first experienced systems kind of doing their own thing, like not what I designed them to do. That took me by surprise, but it kind of stayed with me as possibly something that could be worked on. Then I moved from that side of the business. I worked for a US-owned multinational, and I kind of moved through the production and then sales and marketing into the commercial side of the business. So I kind of cut my strategy teeth in the what was then called the Advanced Products Division, where we were commercializing technology for the fiber optics and telecoms and datacoms kind of revolutions of the day. They're kind of old hat now. So that's me. I got a real call to come back to Scotland, so I took a temporary job at the University of Glasgow about 30 years ago. I'm still there on a part-time basis, and all of that time I've been researching a particular type of research, action research. So basically, probably going back to my origins as a scientist, it's all experimental work with organisations in different parts of the world who are keen to try new things, reflect on it, and figure out whether or not we've hit on something useful for the business or the organisation or the social enterprise, whatever it is. About 10 years ago, just under 10 years ago, with my co-partner, Kate Hooper, my business, you need to edit that. About 10 years ago, with my then business partner, Kate Hooper, we set up Strategy Story, which was kind of coming out of some of the research and some of Kate's interests. Ran that for about 10 years. And then recently, I have come out of Strategy Story. Kate is still taking it forwards. And I'm kind of back into strategy land and figuring out what my next moves are, actually. So that's me in a nutshell. That makes sense.
Yeah, that's good. You've been around researching strategy a lot. You've written a book and you've done some work with Ralph Stacey. When it comes to strategy, what's new, or is it new, or is it the same old? What's your view on how strategy is developing?
Well, great question. I mean, in some ways, it is the same old, same old. I'm listening to a brilliant book at the moment. I picked it up a long time ago, but I've gone back to it, Strategy by Lawrence Freedman, which is like a history of the field forever. It's an incredible piece of work. And in some ways, the core things are still there. I still think it's this really ingenious weave of intent, capability, something you're really good at, and then something out there that you've spotted, some kind of foresight, and it's weaving these things together. So it is that. I think the big changes really are so much in the process side of strategy, the how rather than the what. And there seems to be a growing acceptance, if you like, of the benefits of looking at strategy as an emergent kind of phenomenon. Yeah. So I think emergence is coming to the fore more than it has done in the past. And for me, that's a good thing. The other thing, I've been part of a movement which is originated in Europe maybe 20, 25 years ago, called strategy as practice. And that's increasingly looking at strategy as something that people do rather than strategy as something that organizations have got. The other two kind of key
Yeah.
changes that I'm tuned into.
I like that idea of is something that organizations do, not something they've got, because strategy becomes this thing that like is that the amount of times I get called and go, "Oh, we need a strategy. What for?" And it's more that they need a strategy because it's the dogma of they have to have a strategy, otherwise they seem to be not a business. And the do part resonates me because to me, I find that strategy has to be an ever evolving process. It's not one thing you've done 1 year and then you put it in the drawer until the next year. It's a consistent practice. That you talk about emergence, it's viewing that stuff that's happening, how we interacting, what's changing, what's adapting. But yes, that really stood out to me there.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a way, what's happening there is that the root metaphor of strategy and organization as well is moving away from mechanism. It's taken a long, long time, but it's moving away from this idea of the organization as some kind of machine. We're kind of getting more into the ideas these days, it would seem, of the organization as some system,
Mm.
possibly under the influence of other folk that I've worked with, like Patricia Shaw. I like the idea of conversation as an emergent phenomenon. And in some ways, strategy is this kind of purposeful conversation that continues and continues and continues as things out there change and as the consequences of your own actions become clear. Because we can't always know in advance what's going to happen.
No. And I think that's the typical challenge that people have. My challenge with the orthodoxy is that, it's the thing that we do, and we because we believe the world is stable, then what we say we'll do will happen. Where we know that won't happen. Your work in complexity, it can meet the external environment in loads of different ways, and that conversation is crucial because it's just your staff that you have conversation with is people. And you listen to the different perspectives, and it's by listening to different perspectives and having an actual conversation, do you see how things are actually turning out rather than just sitting back and just thinking, well, my KPI says it's green, so it must be all good.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Mike. In fact, I've got this little saying, which I keep to myself most of the time, but it's like formal strategy is written, actual strategy is spoken. So emergent strategy for me is a constantly spoken phenomenon, which is part of the logic behind things like strategy story. We have to pay attention to what people are saying. And interestingly, I think often what people are saying is not that things have gone according to plan. They actually talk naturally about surprises, about plot
Yeah.
twists, or about really good things, or about really bad things. These are the things that we need to pay a lot of attention to. And that, critically, is almost entirely in the present. So one of the things that kind of gets in my goat slightly with strategy is this obsession with the future and where do you want to be in 200 years' time or 20 minutes' time or whatever. For me, it's much more, where are we now? Yeah, okay, where are we trying to get to? But what can we do based on where we are now and where we think we're trying to get to? It really is much more attention paid to the present and all the tiny little things that are happening, all the things that are being said, because that's the gold dust, I think, of strategic management.
Yeah. And I think it's right. It's like you think about the adjacent possibilities, or what's the next move, or you think about always acting in a way to increase your options. These are all good things because it's I know it's easy to say, oh, let's look to the future and see what happens, but it's inevitably uncertain and unknown. And I think that, like you said, I think people then forget about what options do we actually have now in the present, and where do we need to go next to start unlocking those things. Otherwise, it really does just become sometimes an abstract idea rather than something that's actually tangible that the organization can do through building certain capabilities, making certain decisions, moving resources somewhere, and
Totally.
so on.
So, like something like a game of football or a conversation or whatever, but a game of football, you make a move and the people you're playing against react.
Mm.
And
Yeah,
until
yeah.
we don't know how they're going to react. Until they've reacted, you can't really know what your next move is going to be. So real strategy for me is a highly interactive phenomenon, which is why we need to pay so much attention to what is going on in the here and now. Of course, we need to be good at things. We need to have cultivated strengths and superior abilities. Of course, we need to want to win. We need all that kind of stuff. And of course, we have to take advantage of the environment. But these are the starting points for a strategy. What actually happens, the actual navigation through uncertainty, is a minute by minute, day by day process. It's
Yeah.
live. That's what's good
I
about it.
think that comes back to what you're saying about strategy being something that organizations do. And when I reflect on a lot of strategies I've seen from organizations, they don't, I don't think they really appreciate that dynamic nature, i.e., it's not your players on the pitch, but it's, it's your competitors, it's your suppliers, it's your regulators, it's those. And until you do something, you don't know how they're going to react, or you don't know how you're going to react to when they do something. And like you said, it's a constant minute by minute having a look at seeing what's happening. If we do this, what they're going to do. If they do that, what can we do? And it's then realizing, well, how would we know that that's going to be done? And it's
Totally
sense
agree.
making for those.
So we're back to this amazing phenomenon, uncertainty. It's not that amazing. I mean, it's everywhere. But uncertainty that's the reason for strategy in a way that it's a kind of constant navigation. I've done a lot of competitive sailing, and that's what the skill is. It's sailing through this uncertain weather pattern that makes it strategic. Of course, drawing on your strengths and making the most of the weather and all these kind of things. So much of what you see out there, I would say roughly 80%, Pareto, yet again, about 80% of what you see out there purporting to be strategy isn't strategy at all, really. It's policy. And
Yeah.
increasingly, I've seen that policy with pillars. So here's the 4 or 5 things that we prioritise and that we're going to put all our resources and attention and action into, and that will get us from here to here. And there's nothing wrong with that if you're in a nice, relatively stable situation where your progress through the environment is relatively under control.
Mm.
But that's not where we are just now. That policy's good at that kind of stuff, but that's not what we are. The thing that gets in my wick slightly is them calling that strategy, because it isn't strategy
No,
in my book.
no, it's not. And you see people not understanding the different levels of strategy, because same as yours with policies, mine's with grand strategy, isn't that you see organizations that when it comes, oh, we need to do a strategy, and it's like, well, what's our purpose and and you're thinking, whoa, what you do is not changing. It's probably not going to change for a very long time unless something's drastically changed. We're talking about strategy here, and I think that people get confused around, policy, grand strategy, and then actual strategy that we're talking about. And then they
Totally.
wonder why.
And I mean, you'll know this from experience more than most, that strategy really comes into its own when you are faced with a challenge. Now, that challenge can be positive, can be a big opportunity, or it can be negative. It can be some kind of threat. But that's when strategy comes into play. And so the idea that an organization should have one strategy is a bit like saying it only ever faces one challenge. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Strategies belong to challenges and opportunities. It's not something that should be set in stone and you've got for all time. That would suggest that you're never moving.
Yeah. Or what we tend to see is that the strategy is what we've done last year plus or minus 10%. Or what really gets me upset is when I say let's have a look at your strategy, and it's essentially just a vision statement with, like you said, policy priorities as the pillars. That really upsets me.
Yeah, frustrates me a little bit. You're on it's kind of slightly delicate territory when you ask people what strategy is and they say, "I'll go and get it." Well, that wouldn't really, that wouldn't really work if you were doing it all the time. You wouldn't need to go and get it. So that's what I've often said, is that I don't want to turn into one of these old guys on LinkedIn that's completely ranting about things I don't like about strategy. But since I've started, the other thing that frustrates me slightly is the idea that strategy is the cure for everything. So quite often you'll see somebody news taking over a business, or somebody news in power and politics or whatever it is, and we've got a new strategy. And again, 80% of the time, strategy is not what's needed. You maybe need better general management, or you need better business model, but not necessarily a new strategy. So I think it's been the whole construct and concept has been thinned out and kind of distorted a little bit to the point where it's almost becoming meaningless. And that's the thing, because I really believe in the idea of strategy at its heart. That's the thing that I find frustrating, because real good strategy is something special and can have you kind of punch in the air saying, "Oh wow, we did it, we did it,"
Yeah.
and
It-
that's a phenomenal feeling.
and that's why I like, definitely when I'm helping people to develop strategy, is that moment where it's a bit cathartic, it's emotional. They've seen a way through a challenge and they know how to maneuver. But I totally agree where I see it's just thinned out. I always say that it's been captured by marketing. It becomes this marketing thing rather than actual strategy. It becomes about sound bites and how can we make shiny slides rather than actual strategy.
I
And
think,
you're right about this. Sorry, you can.
no, that's an interesting point. I think that, in fairness, there quite a lot of organisations have got a published strategy, which is the one in the glossy document that probably very few people actually do. And then somewhere in that organisation, there is actually some strategic behaviour, but it's not the one that's being published. That is the emergent strategy that is live.
Yeah.
If it's this ingenious combination of intent, foresight, capability, blah blah blah.
Yeah. And you're right about the strategy isn't the answer for everything, because you can speak to a lot of people and they go, "Oh, we've got this HR strategy, we've got this innovation strategy, we've got this strategy," and you're thinking, well, it's not really, it's not strategy, and two, it's not what you need. And a lot of times, I've had it before with clients and that you're looking at and go, well, we need a strategy. Maybe, yeah, but you also need to sort out some fundamental things in your organization. You're not structured. We could create or help you create this great strategy, but you would have no way of achieving that because you're structured in a way that will limit you. It constrains you too much to do anything actually worthwhile chasing for.
Totally agree. I do agree with that. So the first thing is, check your business model is okay, check your management practices are okay, and then if big challenges come out of all of that, maybe it's time to engage with a strategy. And then for me, there's two kind of key things. One is the logic. Strategies are really simple logic. So the logic has to be right, not overcomplicated, pretty straightforward. It's basically just an ingenious version of ends, means, and conditions on quite a big scale. And then get people involved. If the folk who are
Yeah.
actually going to do it don't get it, how can you expect them to do it? So you
Yeah.
need to get folk involved and be part of it. And I think with technology, that's becoming increasingly possible. And it's still a bit of a mystery to me as to why it's not taken off more quickly. I mean, I know that there will be answers like defensive routines and habits and all kinds of stuff, but the scope for involving more people in rapid creation of strategy has never been higher, I don't think. That's a really
No.
exciting development. It's also where, for me, because this emergent stuff is spoken, once you kick it off, it then takes on a life of its own, if you're lucky. Then you need to pay this attention and listen to what people are saying. You need to listen to the stories that people are sharing with one another, because that's where all the gold dust is. The power of the human voice and all of that kind of stuff, I think, is absolutely key. So the way
Yeah.
people talk to one another, what they say, all that kind of stuff, storytelling. And I think this is something that, partly because of the machine metaphor, it's been very difficult for us to grasp. And lots of people will still say, "No, you're wrong there, Donald." But what makes people do things strategically is emotionally compelled, not intellectually. So one of the things about sharing stories, yeah, we need to get the logic, but in actual fact, people do things because they make them feel good, or because they're really scared, and not doing it would make them feel even worse. But most of the stuff that propels people to action is emotional. And I think we're pretty inarticulate in our organizations about the processes of leadership that engender genuine commitment to things together.
Yeah. But that surely comes back to that conversation piece, isn't it? It's the um I see it where we've got someone that's developed the strategy. I'm all for, open strategy, a bit more involvement, but they made the strategy. The strategy is not communicated. All that's communicated down is that we're now doing this, or you're doing this, and there's no conversation in between. There's no rationale. There's no like we are trying to do this for this reason. So if you could do this, that can help us achieve this. And there's none of that assimilation. So in that conversation, this is what we're thinking about, and allowing that space for conversation or proper planning. That proper space between, right, this is the initial idea we've got. Let's have this conversation. Let's have a, kick around some thoughts, which one gives you the rationale, but also gets you invested in actually delivering something rather than just being told, yeah, we're now doing this. And then it gets rolled down. Why are we doing this? Well, I don't know. We've just been told. That doesn't really scream investment or commitment to me.
I do agree with that. I mean, I think if you look at strategy content, what people are doing, what the strategy is about, then it has to have this good logic. For me, that's this intent, foresight, capability, and some ingenious weave that surprises people, kind of thing you think, I wish I'd thought of that. That's a sign of something really good. The process side of it, I think, is another really familiar framework. It basically why, what, who, when, where, how. And people have to continually touch base on that because this thing is now moving. And so when, I've been working with organizations, all you do is gather people together from different silos, different bits, and say, right, let's talk about what's actually happening. Why, what, who, when, how, where, blah, blah, blah. And home in on the bits that really strike everybody. It's actually remarkably straightforward. It's sad that it's not more prevalent because it's natural and it's quite easy.
Yeah, that's the thing that surprised me digging out I've said this before, when I left the military, I thought strategy was one thing that civilian organisations had completely nailed. And I thought, what can I add to this? I'm from the military, it's completely different. But then I realised it's not. And there's a lot of, not all bad, I sometimes I'm worried that I come on here and just say, oh, it's all rubbish and I'm the only one with the answers. Not true. There's a lot of good stuff out there, but there is this over complicated nature of strategy, very mechanistic, and I think we leaders are outsourcing that to strategy teams that in my opinion are just effectively PMOs, and that means then you miss all the conversation and that real understanding about how the strategy is connecting with the external environment, and then it becomes strategy by management by green lights, which I think lose all the connection from it. And it's just like, well, is my KPI or my OKR green, red, or whatever? And that's how they seem to manage it. They lose the conversation.
I agree with that. Mike, we have to be honest here and say outsourcing it to strategy teams and sometimes strategy consultants, and it does become like this, I think, an intellectual exercise. And of course, because it doesn't work, because the conversation and the emotional energy isn't there, the kind of habitual response to that is, well, try harder. So the try harder is make it more intellectual, more complicated, more bells, more whistles, more measures, more this, more that. And in actual fact, what's needed is a radical simplification and a much more organic conversational process that everybody feels part of.
You've got to have that ownership, even with consultants. If you get consultants in, the consultant has to be very wary about the boundary that they're in and what they're there for, and to facilitate that strategic conversation. You can't move it out that route. You can't. If you get a consultancy and they go, oh, we'll develop your strategy, and they go off in a dark room and start looking at benchmarking and all this stuff, then you know you're not in a good place.
I agree with that. But please don't get me wrong. There's a definite role for consultants because they bring different perspectives, different experiences, lots of expertise. But all the good ones, and I mean, hopefully I'm putting myself and you in this category,
hopefully,
is that when we're engaged, we do strategy with the people.
Yes. Yeah.
We don't do strategy to the people. I think there's a lot of there are some out there, usually bigger organizations, that have got off-the-shelf solutions, basically, and I'm just not a fan of that.
No, it can't be off the shelf, and that's what it is. Like, but it's the same with just that same thing that you said there about with the people. That's extremely relevant for consultants. It's got to be with the people, but it's also without consultants there in your executive team. You've got to do that with the people in the organisation. Yeah.
Excuse me. So you're a military guy, Mike, and I am not an expert in military strategy, but of course that is really the origin and home of strategy in organisations and businesses, a relatively recent phenomenon, 50, 60, 70 years in terms of the formal side of things, whereas in the military it's been, thousands of years. But I'm pretty sure it was the military that articulated the phrase hearts and minds.
Yeah. And
so the idea that you have to get both engaged, the emotional and the intellectual side of the organisation, is not new. It's just kind of alien to some organisations at the moment.
Yeah, it's even down in our principles of war. The first print, there's 9 of them. Don't tell me to say all 9, but I'm a bit rusty. But the first one, the very first principle of war is maintenance of the aim, maintenance of morale.
Yep.
First two principles. Sorry, maintenance of the aim, maintenance of morale. First 2 principles. And that's where it's really important because they are up there on the first 2 principles, and it is I suppose it's obvious because in the strategy you're in directly involves people because we're sending young men and women into battle. We need to make sure that we've thought about it and we have people engaged to understand what we are trying to achieve, because that's where we get the adaptability. You're not going to get any more complex or volatile than frontline military. And that's where at the very heart of it, we've learned that you can't treat people like machines because you need the people to be adaptable, and to be adaptable, they need the resources, they need the information, they need to have that understanding to what you're trying to get them to achieve so they can adapt as the circumstances change, as things emerge that we weren't quite expecting.
As we weren't quite expecting, yeah. And that is the key, isn't it? So it's this uncertainty again. I think it's this ability to deal with uncertainty and take people with one in a strategically meaningful way that is the real hallmark of a leader. We're going to make the most of this uncertainty rather than just try and cope with it or run away from it. We're really going to work on and with it. I mean, again, I'm not an expert in this field, but my very limited understanding of Clausewitz, who was a massive military strategy influence, I've seen various people kind of replicate his ideas, but one that I can remember, because it was 3 Ps, was policy, passion, and probability. And he's basically saying there, okay, so we've got whatever it is we're trying to achieve. The passion bit is you've got to contend with the fact that people are engaged emotionally, either positively or negatively. And, it's part of our job to manage that. And then probability, of course, is the chance bit that you just can't program. So in a way, where we are with strategy now isn't that much different at all.
No, it isn't. I've looked all the way back into Sun Tzu, who was, I think, 300 years before Christ. We're going a long way back now. And he talked about strategy as this emergent, adaptable thing full of uncertainty. And he talked about morale in there as well. He talked about all this stuff back then. It just seems that we sort of went through this stage, I think, that we forgot that, especially the adaptability thing. And I don't know, it was we got comfortable with a bit of uncertainty and thought things were quite certain.
I don't know. I think a funny thing's happened kind of post Michael Porter, who I think made a really interesting contribution to strategy and quite a helpful one in some ways, is that particularly in some larger organizations, the competitive dimension of strategy seems to have lost a bit of its traction. And for me, however unfashionable it is, that's what strategy is all about. It's about trying, with this ingenious combination of intent, foresight, and capability, to nudge up the odds of you succeeding when the resources that you require are in not infinite supply, so there's some kind of scarcity.
Yeah.
And that necessarily brings about competition, whether it's in the private sector for market power or market share or orders or whatever it is, or the public sector for funding and support. Competition's a massive part of it, and it kind of really strikes me that so much of the strategy document that you see now, competition hardly gets a mention. I mean, it hardly gets a mention. It's more like, this is what we want to do. This is what our 3 or 4 pillars are. we'll see in 5 years' time. And of course, by that time, most of the folk that wrote the strategy document will have gone.
I think people, I think it's like, is it not in fashion, not in vogue now? I don't know why, but you see most strategies and it's about, it's all about, it's niceness, isn't it? It's like, this is why I was talking about marketing capturing strategy. It becomes this like external projection of being nice, where we talk about strategy as to your advantage. And that can be, you still be competitive through collaboration or thing that, but it's always to your advantage. How do I shape the external environment to my advantage?
Totally. And so that says that, for me anyway, great analysis of the Cuban Missile Crisis when Allison looked at it through the lens of rationality, culture, and politics. And for me, I still think the most compelling way of looking at strategy is a political process. It's a power game. And that means that there's two real dimensions. One is the competition one, which we've just touched on, but the other critically important one, of course, is the alliancing dimension. Who do you collaborate with? And with the emergence of platforms and massively scaled organizations, I think this dynamic is undergoing fundamental change at the moment. If you like, the balance between competition and collaboration is changing in strategy, and it's going to change it quite a lot, I think. So that's one of the things that excites me that I'm watching at the moment.
Is it? Yeah. We were getting onto that. What excites you and frustrates you, but I think you're right, and you're making me really reflect on this thing about people losing this sort of competitive edge of strategy. And you know what I find the real beauty of strategy is, you mentioned it about limited resources, is that constraints. Is it because if there was no constraints and the world was perfect and you had all the resources in the world and all this stuff, you wouldn't need strategy because you could just go do stuff. But this strategy is about, making those decisions and, creating advantage through those real limited resources and constraints. And it's Clausewitz that talked about that. Clausewitz said, strategy is, any organization, regardless of size, has limited resources. Therefore, strategy is about exercising limited resources to your advantage.
Totally agree. Absolutely. And using whatever's out there in the environment to maximize the extent to which you can leverage them in a really clever way. And that's why it's so clever and it's so creative. And that cannot be algorithmically captured, because you get some geniuses that just say, how's about this? And everybody thinks, that was clever. Wish we'd thought of that. That's what makes it an exciting subject for me, I think. The eureka moment.
Yeah, and me. And you get it really frustrates me when I see those strategies that, like, we're going to be the most inclusive, collaborative, blah, 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 best. And I'm like, well, you can't, do that then. Why, because they're missing the whole element around, actually what is happening, that dynamic relationship with the external environment, the constraints they're in. They're missing all that in that conversations.
It's really interesting what's happening there. I mean, one of the fundamental things in human behavior, according to some people, is mimicry. We mimic one another. And I think organizations do the same thing. So there's a big line in institutional theory within social theory that talks about the way in which organizations copy one another. And there's a brilliant term. I'm going to use it. Everybody will start turning off your podcast right now. Mimetic isomorphism. So that through copycat behavior, all organizations eventually become the same. And I think that you can see that in a lot of the big strategy documents that you see being produced by all kinds of organizations at the moment. They're all basically saying the same thing. Particularly when you get into kind of governmental strategies, they're all obvious and B, probably downloadable. And you think, well, that's actually, although it's called a strategy, that's the anti-strategy. That's not strategy at all. That's just copycat behavior. It's so obvious. It can't possibly be strategy.
Yeah. I totally agree. So on that theme, what else is sort of frustrating you with strategy at the moment?
Well, if you got only one other thing, and then I'd rather talk, because I'm generally an optimist. I actually think I'm a designer, because a friend of mine once defined a designer as somebody who's continually dissatisfied but perpetually optimistic. So I think I am still optimistic. A few things frustrate me, but that's the beginning of the change process, possibly. So the final thing that frustrates me, and I'm not alone in this, I mean, I know it frustrates many people, is the strangulating effect of modern governance on many organizations.
Yeah, yeah,
So because governance is largely about the organization delivering what it promised to deliver in the interests of its stakeholders, by definition almost is a controlling thing. And I think I think that is the biggest barrier to breakthrough at the moment. I think there are people working on new models of governance that are about collective learning and trust and all these kind of things. And brilliant, keep going with that. I do think we need to replace this control freak version of governance. It's a big problem,
yeah,
especially in some of our large public sector institutions, incidentally. You know,
yeah,
that and you can understand it because the press are baying, they're waiting for something terrible to go wrong. So the whole architecture and practice is one of fear. It's not a good place to be when what you need is innovation.
No, I totally agree. And I see at the moment, especially we talked earlier about emergent strategy and all this and complexity theory and systems thinking that's coming. It's almost that's moving forward and it's having a good effect. But the governance is almost got it on the leash. It can only move so quickly away from governance. You even see it in I was looking at these, was it board, how to be a board member, how to be a CEO, and he looked at governance, and I was thinking, wow, if you actually followed that to a T, your organization cannot or would not have any adaptability.
That's right. Which is another way of saying you'd be in complete control.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And unfortunately, these two things go in hand. So yeah, if you're in complete control, what you've got there is a relatively simple mechanism. And I keep saying to people, the defining characteristic of a mechanism, by the way, is that it's dead, right?
Mm.
So according to the second law of thermodynamics, a mechanism will proceed from order to disorder. My car, unfortunately, does not spontaneously improve, right? It gets worse. And so organizations that are designed as mechanisms increasingly need more and more managerial overhead just to hang together because
Yeah.
they've got decay built into their architecture. Every time they do something, it gets wobblier. And so they get
Mm.
more and more top heavy with management. And the people who are delivering services at the bottom are under more and more and more pressure. And the complaint is we've not got enough money. I'm afraid I don't buy that. We need radical redesign of a lot of these organizations. And their governance
Yeah, yeah,
processes would be where you'd have to start.
yeah. I agree. I love the term that Stafford Beer uses for that, which is pathological autopoiesis. Is that
Not a good place to be.
No, 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 no. I think it really sums it up. So yeah, I'm totally agreeing with that. Governance really does need to match what we're trying to do with the real world, which is be adaptable, be flexible, and it's that coherence, it's having enough coherence so that people can be self-organizing and adapt to changes without falling apart. So I totally agree. So what?
I picked up a great term on LinkedIn, and I'm sorry, the originator, because I can't remember exactly who said this, but I know it wasn't me, the original idea, but it's a good one, which was that a lot of our larger bureaucracies suffer in the governance domain, particularly from what they call the Gulliver effect. So from Gulliver's Travels, you know, Swift's novel, they're
Yeah,
massive big giants tied down by millions of little threads.
yeah, true, true. And I wrote about that not long ago. Well, not about the Gulliver effects, but about organization needing to protect people's ability to act.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
And that's
yeah.
about it, is about we put too many constraints down that, we remove all freedom of action, all initiative for sake of the belief of stability and control, or do we remove some of those unnecessary and enable freedom of action? Because I know which one is going to help.
The interesting thing, Mike, is that each one of these threads, probably 80-90% of them, on its own was the rational response to a particular situation. It's just that cumulatively they're paralyzing.
Yeah.
And because the
Yeah.
organization's so fragmented, nobody can see that.
No. It's interesting when you try and shine a mirror up and they're like, it's a complete shock to a lot of them. Or the shock becomes when things start to fail pretty quickly.
Yep. There could be a
Yeah.
lot of that going
But
on
so
too.
let's move on to something, because you're an optimistic guy. What energizes you about strategy at the moment? What's the stuff that is making you smile?
Okay. So with the business strategy story, with my research before that, with my thing has always been to try and I sound like I'm trying to be cool here, to keep it real and make it real, but I don't mean it in a cool way. I just mean, could we ditch 80% of the gobbledygook? Of course, we still need some technical terms as shortcuts, but could we ditch a lot of the gobbledygook? Could we ditch a lot of the unnecessary procedures and practices and just be more natural with each other as people, respect one another, trust one another a bit, critique one another, contest things, just be normal people? So could we do strategy like people? It's a very simple request. And of course, this in itself was a movement in the strategy field. It was called, unpeoply, the re-personalisation of strategy. And I think that's going on. But it excites me that the human being, and in my view, the fully embodied human being, is coming back into view. And so we're beginning to say, okay, so yeah, we're rational, but, sorry, all the neoclassical economists out there, that's not my defining characteristic. I can be rational, but I am not an out-and-out utility maximizer. I do mad things. Sometimes I'm irrational, sometimes I'm non-rational. I do things sometimes because I feel them. It's nothing to do with what I think, blah, blah, blah. I'm intuitive, instinct, experience, all that kind of stuff, I think, is beginning to count a little bit more, and people are beginning to take it more seriously. And of course, neuroscience is saying that we have to do this if we want to save ourselves from, bad places. So I think the re-emergence of the person at the centre of strategy is really good. I think that does present some challenges for certain versions of systems theory, by the way, but that's a different story. I think that's a different story.
Yeah, I'm on board with that. I do fear with that, because I think we need to get people back. Is that with the rise of AI, that people are automatically trying to go straight to AI for the answer, rather than having the conversation with people and bringing people back into the mix of strategy. Definitely, when you talk about the emotion part, where I talk about the cognitive, behavioural, and effective means of strategy. Like, if you get people together, you get those, and if you get those, then you got more chance that people will be invested to deliver that strategy.
Totally agree. And I think there's a real big challenge for organisations post-COVID, because home working and hybrid working has become so normalised. We don't really understand fully what it is that connects people and generates this emotional energy between people when they're together. So, excuse me, I think there's quite a lot of work to be done still on how to promote social cohesion and kind of shared intent when we are virtualized for so much of our time now. So I think, although the human being coming back in is good, it's not without its challenges. But I have to tell you, Mike, AI, I'm quite excited about AI. In the algorithmic version of strategy, the kind of logical version, which is really, really important, I think AI can be a big help with that. I mean, because of the way it can go out there, grab data, process data, blah, blah, blah. It's very, very good. And also, even more excitingly for me, all the mimetic strategies that are produced through sheer algorithm will render that form of strategy completely meaningless, because everybody will have it. So it will disappear. I think that's brilliant. And then it will be left to people to take what AI has given them, work with it, inject some human and human only creativity and social energy, and strategy might become a really exciting, fun, gobbledygook free experience for people again. So I think, that's quite exciting. And finally, you can see I'm getting excited now. And I might have 200, 300, 500, 1,000 colleagues in the west of Scotland or the Highlands, and we think we want to develop a strategy here for our region. Let's all get online, get AI helping us, and we're going to take all our ideas, sift them, focus them, talk about them in an afternoon. So the scale that's going to be available to us is phenomenal. That's exciting.
Yeah, and I totally agree. Having it as an enabler, as an input to strategy is fantastic, especially what you can do, because, like you said, AI can go and get loads of scenarios and stuff that's going. It can pretend to be a competitor. It can be pretend to be a collaborator. You know, you can give it a persona of all sorts of things to test people in the room. That utility of it, I think, is fantastic and should be utilized.
Yep. I think I saw you on LinkedIn saying once that, you get the power in stories and storytelling, but it can't just be a story about anything. There has to be a logic and a capability and some ingenuity at the heart of that, or it's just a story. So what makes for a strategic story? I think AI can really help drive the strategic logic at the heart of some of these stories, but never to the removal of humans. I mean, that's just nonsense.
Yeah. I think you're right. And I think, I really like this idea of repurposing or bringing back humans. And I think it's a constant thread we've been talking about throughout the numerous podcasts, all the way from like Julia Houtz talking about open strategy, getting people involved. Like you said, there is perfect in the sense that, across the Highlands, you can get all this input. You don't necessarily have to be in the room, but you can get all that input, which is fantastic, all the way to actually taking space before the execution to get people around to understand and to plan and to have conversations about the strategy, to that connection with people that are actually delivering it, to the sense making, the people that are enacting the strategy throughout. I think there's the common thread there about that reconnection with people, listening, understanding, sort of sense making, that really brings the richness to strategy, which you need that human connection for, beyond your teams meetings, these actual
Here.
purposeful meetings.
That was beautifully said. Here to that, Mike. And it's not that in an afternoon you're going to come out with a perfect strategy. Of course you're not.
No.
But you are going to come out with enough to get people moving. The great resource-based theorist and strategy voice Jay Barney I once heard ask this question, which is, what would you rather have, a 90% strategy with 30% buy-in, or a 50% strategy with 90% buy-in? And of course, it's a good question, because the answer is, I think I'd go for the second one, because we can change it.
Yes.
And what I really want is everybody to be on board and we get moving, and then together we change it and we focus it and we flex it.
You're right though around we can change it, and I think that's the crucial thing. And I suppose that comes back to the governance issue. In reality, if you had that 50% strategy that 90% people are brought in onto, that's going to be a lot more powerful, because there's no such thing as a perfect strategy, because we can sit there and stargaze it all we want to try and create the perfect strategy. By the time we've left the room, things have changed anyway. So I'd rather people essentially do something and observe and reorientate to what's happened and develop it over time, rather than think we've got to try and get everything perfect, all the financials, everything done. Because by that time, people have forgotten about it or lost interest. Where if you can get that engagement and you can go and you can adapt, I think that's a good way to go.
Totally. It's like, don't optimize your strategy on paper, optimize it through action.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because like you said before about the teams, football, it's like, well, we don't know what's going to happen. We can assume and you could think and we could make plausible things, but until we actually kick that ball and see how it reacts and who reacts to it, I don't really know what my next move is.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot in there about that. That's I like that. 50% or 90% on. That's a really good way to look at it and gets people into that action. I get really sort of drained when people want the perfect thing that's like all polished and everything's got to be worthy. I'm not very conscientious, so I'm like that anyway. I'm just like, yeah, but that's good enough. Let's go. The spelling mistakes, Mike. Yeah, it'll be right. It's good enough. Let's go. I think that's cool. Is there anything else? Anything else and you think about where strategy's going now that's standing out for you?
Well, I think there's like two other things. One is, I mean, the growth of things like LinkedIn and the likes, the fact that we're doing this, and I hope that there's going to be just more than me and you listening to it. Maybe my mum out in the island cheering up. So I think attention is becoming a much bigger phenomenon. It's always been big, of course, but people are beginning to think about it. And I think in the strategy academy itself, the attention-based view is rising and beginning to gain prominence. So I think the ways in which I don't know if manage is the right word, but in the way we think about and deal with attention as a resource, probably the fundamental resource, is really interesting. So that's a development that I'll be, hopefully keeping my eye on at least, and maybe even getting involved with if we are entering into what some people are calling the attention economy, which is right down at the level of individuals. In LinkedIn, nobody really cares that much about what organization you're part of. It's all about you.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah, yeah,
on the
yeah.
one hand, we've got these massive platforms that span the planet, which is another interesting development because all kinds of changes are happening there and different ways of collaborating and competing. So we've got this massive scale on the one hand, and then we've got the micro, right down to individual people day by day. So the attention, and then this massive scale of platforms, I think that's a really big thing. And then finally, with tech, I think because I think of strategy primarily as a political process, I think governance will have to change because it's going to be much easier for staff, customers, interested parties to communicate with the organization's owners or governors. And I think so. I think because over the last 20 or 30 years, there's been a massive surge of what I would perhaps unkindly call managerialism. The extent to which an organization is being managed for the good of its stakeholders is always a question and always has been a question. I think the ability of people to interrogate that and get involved in that could change quite dramatically. And you'll see that in government and local government and large corporates and all kinds of community organizations. I think engagement's going to become a different level, and that will bring with it both some incredible energy, but also some significant challenges when things are not going well. So, I think that's a really interesting space. And of course, that does play into the opening Richard Whittington's 20, sorry, Richard. Richard Whittington's, I think it was 2019 book, Opening Strategy, which is just how the field is gradually becoming more open. And I know you featured that in your in podcasts. It doesn't mean it's going to be democratic, but there could be a lot more contestability and jostling than has been the case in the past, and that's going to be interesting because A, it will cost, but B, it might also bring about dividends if it's managed properly.
Yeah. I think that open strategy is really good in just that sense of unearthing different perspectives and different tensions, and that like you said, jostling. I like that idea about jostling, but I think it's got to maintain that it's not going to turn out to be a vote. There still needs to be a decision that needs to be made. And
Totally agree with that.
Yeah,
Totally
yeah.
agree with that. One of the things, in particularly in this part of the world, but in many parts of the world, is the role of, if we get back into military strategy again, if you look at our clan system, that you had the chieftain, who was usually a warrior, and they were all about nabbing territory or cutting one another's heads off, something like that. But a very important person in the clan also was the bard, and their job was basically communication, partly with this, with the great out there and the supernatural, but partly also with people in the clan or the tribe itself. And I think we're also seeing, it's part of the logic behind the formation of strategy story. I think the power of communication in this more open field is ramping up. So strategy has been a bit of a fashion industry. It's gone from economics through marketing, through OB and HR. I would say that strategy now is heavily drifting towards the importance of communication.
Yeah, I agree. Well, if people don't know what you want, then how are they going to enact it?
Partly that. And if they can't tell you what they think, why should they bother what you think?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree. I was chatting about this earlier today, and it was about that psychological. They're talking about psychological safety, and I said, but one element of psychological safety that people don't really talk about is that bit where, well, why should I tell you anything? Because nothing's going to happen, or no one's going to listen, and you can't get to that point in strategy because then you essentially lose all your eyes and ears in your organization, the widest parts that are enacting with the edges of your organization, because they're just not going to tell you anything. Because, well, what's the point? One, there's no mechanism to communicate, and two, no one's listening to me anyway, so I'll just keep it to myself. Yeah, I like that. there's some really good insights. I know I'm going to reflect on those and think about that, definitely around the attention economy and how that's going to impact and shape how we do strategy, or the point of strategy. That's going to be really interested. But it's been absolutely fantastic to have you on. I've thoroughly enjoyed this chat.
Thank you, Mike. Likewise, so have I. I've been fortunate enough to work with some ex-military people in the past, and as I've said to you before, you guys know how to get things done, and that's what strategy should be about.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and we are good at getting things done when we're on operations. But just for the guests, what would you like to leave the listeners to think about from this episode?
That is a good question. I should have anticipated that. It shows you how rubbish at foresight I actually am. I would say create spaces in your organisation to get people together and reflect on what is happening, what that means for you all, and then get expert help within the organisation or from outside the organisation to take all that and keep iterating the strategic behavior of the organisation. But be natural, get people together, talk, share stories, but keep this strategic logic at the heart of all the conversations and get everybody involved. That would really be what I would say.
Yeah, I agree. I think and I think like we talked about the attention economy in organization, there's that perceived time economy where they sacrifice this precious time for just getting stuff done today, where actually taking that time out and actually understanding from people that can really help unlock really difficult challenges that gets the organization moving exponentially. But it just takes that little bit of time up front. But like you said, I think
Totally.
yeah, and in your point, naturally, I've seen it so
Naturally.
many. Yeah,
It's the poor Robert Burns is a great line from Tail House. Would's empower the gift he gave us to see ourselves as others see us. So every now and again, we need to get everybody together so that we can share perspectives. It's these different perspectives that give us a complete picture. Strategy is about the big picture. Imagine a football match without a half-time talk if you're getting beat. It's game over.
yeah. I like that. Yeah.
So we just need to have many more half-time talks.
Yeah, that's really good. I like that analogy. Yeah, because you wouldn't, would you?
No.
No. Yeah, that's just sort of really just, yeah, spot on. I like that. Cool. Thank you. And for the listeners out there, if you enjoyed the conversation as much as I have, please like, share, and subscribe if you want to see our episodes that are every Tuesday we release these. So I look forward to hearing what your thoughts on our conversation is. But until next time, thank you, Donald, for joining me. It's great pleasure. And I'll hopefully
Thank you,
catch
Mike.
up with you soon.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you.